hello, folk. You get me to talk about AI. I can see that this is a topic that, by people leaving the room, that's just, everyone's really kind of into at the moment. I just did have a question for you before I begin. Who here has thought about governance and AI before? Okay, quite a few folk. Excellent. So, I'm Margaret Bearman. I'm from the Centre for Research and Assessment in Digital Learning, CRADLE, and I just want to say in this particular talk, I am not a deep expert. I'm going to talk three caveats. First of all, I have a research interest in how AI is used in organisations and have done for a long time, so that's going to feed into this. Secondly, I have a lived experience. I was a chair of the Working Party on AI and Policy and Governance for Deakin University. And thirdly, where I'm coming from is Manchester. I got off the plane yesterday, so forgive all my... and that's why I want to stand. I don't want to sit down. I want to look at those lights. Manchester, though, was very alive, as you can imagine, with all the excitement that's happening in the UK right now. All right, so, and all I'm going to do today is put up 7 challenges for discussion. What I've learnt about from the research work, what I've learnt from my lived experience, and what I'd like to do is, a lot of my research has been informed by Professor Klaus Hoyer. So he's a professor in health, so you'll see a lot of my examples are from health, and he's worked around datafication for a long time, because there's a lot of work here around AI and how it integrates into organisational structures, and what I'm most interested in the stuff people do in their lives, and with the CRADLE hat, how they learn, but that's another story. You can ask me about that, but I'm not going to talk about it. So I wanted to start off by saying what I meant by AI, because we use the term a lot, and mostly we might mean ChatGPT, but I want to say that there's a lot more to it than that. AI has been around and it's been integrated into our lives for a really long time. We all carry AI in our pockets, and it's had huge, profound effects on what we do and how we do it already. So anyone who's questioning the transformative power of AI, think of social media. It is probably the biggest AI intervention we've had to date, and it has really changed a lot of how we live. What I'm interested in here today is the capabilities that AI has of providing decisions, it creates outputs, and it directs our attention. Listening to before, talking about reviewing CVs and so forth, it says what's important and what isn't important, and that's one of the things it does, and we need to take account of that. And I also want to point out that governance of AI, and certainly when I was in my policy working party, it's so strongly entwined with data management, with cybersecurity, with IT procurement, and those conversations you can't have a conversation about governance of AI without thinking about those things, as well as workforce management, of course. So now I'm going to lay out my 7 challenges for you, and we can have a chat about them. So what I've learnt from research. First of all, there are opportunities, and we've talked a lot about the opportunities. Had a bit of a chat there to say how HR is using 1 day a week is being saved in the use of AI, but AI is thoroughly integrated into these sorts of worlds, some more successfully than others. Medical imaging, architecture, policing, software development, it's a daily proposition. And the advantages we all know about, it's speed, routine, data, image, text, manipulation, management, production, and this automated software coding, huge. So all of that's the advantages. Now we'll talk a bit about the challenges. Challenge 1. There is a gap between promise and reality. And anyone who's used any form of AI will encounter that. It can do amazing things, but there's always a leap. And any form of study of AI in practice shows that. So AI saves labour, but it creates labour. And we often don't talk about the labour that it creates as well too. And any time you talk about something that's super exciting and possible and amazing, that all can be true, but there is always a gap. And it's like to go back to the social media example, the promise of social media, who remembers, who's old like me and can remember when Facebook came out, the promise of social media and what it is actually turned into in our daily lives are very different. So there's always a gap. Secondly, algorithms and data do really strange things to responsibility. And you see this really clearly in health. I've done some work on it myself. If you get data and the data tells you something and your professional judgment tells you another, something about your context and your space says, I don't think that's quite right, there's this weird mix of responsibility shifting. Do I believe in the data? Do I trust myself? When do I say I own this and how? Because AI comes with a lot of doubt. And if you look across professional worlds, that's one thing that always comes up, is when they work with AI, there's always doubt. I've read studies of journalists using AI, and they almost have to check just as much as they did before because they're so paranoid about taking responsibility. It does very strange things. The third challenge is benefits are context specific. So what works in one place doesn't necessarily work in the other, and you might think that it would be, we could make some assumptions. In medical imaging, again, something I've worked in a lot, radiology, the benefits are fairly straightforward, but in pathology, another medical imaging profession, they're quite different. Because in radiology, the slides are digitally captured, or the images are digitally captured, an X-ray, whatever, digitally captured. In pathology, they've got to take a piece of tissue, slice it, put it under a microscope, scan it. There's a lot more work to get the images into a format where the AI can work. And so the benefits and the images aren't that great. So the benefits are very context specific. They might at surface appear to be identical. That's what I've learnt from research. What I've learnt from inside governance structures. Challenge 4, substantial ethical and legal risks. Absolutely substantial. And there's the seeding, there's we cannot remove bias from these systems. It's not possible. It's in everything they do. So we need to have our own protections around it. There's privacy. I mean, if you think about the deep fake, and I'm not talking about stuff that we make, that our students bring onto campus. I don't know who works in that field, but there are already so many harms going on right now. Let alone if you talk to the lawyers, everyone breaks out in a cold sweat. And then a lot of this is not yet resolved either, the legal issues. So all of that. And this is interesting because the benefits and detriments are unstable. We always say there's going to be a new system next year and it's going to be better. Things are improving all the time. That's difficult. They're unknown, so we don't know which bits of the equation it's really going to benefit and how. And they're not whole of enterprise. So it works out patchily. Again, very similar to that sort of idea that what works in one context doesn't work in another. So we've kind of got this challenge of an amorphous thing that's shifting, and we have to adapt with it. And universities, we're not really, and talk about Privet and Agile, we're really big organisations. I've worked in universities a long time. We're slow, we're lumbering, it's part of our strength. We have trouble with this, I think. This is a general complaint. Governance structures are not set to work across the portfolios. They tend to have very set lines. You work in research, you speak to your head of school and that goes up that way. Teaching goes up usually through the DVCA, the DVCE, and professional portfolios do their own thing. And AI and its introductions and its policies, as we discovered, cut across all of that. If we have a responsible use of AI policy, it cuts across academics, students, professional staff members, everyone. So, and the universities, its formal structures aren't set up to deal with that. So that's a peculiar university thing. 7th challenge, who owns the decisions? Again, generally a problem in a big organisation. When it comes to AI, it seems to be really slippery. Because often the people who make the decisions are not the people with the expertise. Often that expertise might usually in the past have gone up through a CIO because it might be about procurement, but this time round it's actually weaving its way through the whole thing. And owning those decisions to me, which is people and culture, we're talking about it's the people first, not the AI, co-pilot, not autopilot. With AI, someone has to own the decision. Someone has to take responsibility for it. And who is it? It's really sometimes a bit sticky and difficult to tell. It might be a committee, it might be an individual. It's hard to know. So that's all I was going to rant at you about. This is my current thinking. First of all, I think we need to be principles-led, and I can see that thinking's everywhere. Human-led decision-making. I think that most people would agree with that. Secondly, and I might be more alone on this, I think we need to be promises sceptical. How technology integrates into practice is rarely what happens. And it doesn't mean that it's not going to be transformational. It doesn't mean it's not going to change everything. It's just probably not going to be what we think it will be. And it may not be all out as beneficial. There will be benefits and detriments. There'll be savings and there will be losses. And I think we need to be really careful about making sure we don't get seduced by only the positive stories. We need to be informed by risk management, and that means we need to take risks. We need to take risks because if we don't integrate AI, that's a risk. But if we do it in the wrong way, that's also a risk. And I think risk management provides us with a lot of a good framework to follow this in. The risk of not doing as much as the risk of doing. I am now tooting my own trumpet, but our working group worked really well together. We were a small, agile group. We cut across the university, and then we gave up our recommendations to other structures. But we worked really well together across the portfolios. And for me, that was a really good way of working. We could hear each other's perspectives as professional staff, as academics, all on the same page, and try and come to some sort of collection of the issues. And then these go up and get ratified or modified by the larger formal structures. And finally, we must identify responsible parties. I've seen too many recommendations kind of go up into the ether. We need to say who holds the final say for each bit of the governance puzzle. Can't all be held by everyone. There will be various decisions that need to be made or held by groups, by people. And that needs to be done, I think, very urgently. So that's it. That's my rapid fire 7 challenges for you. What do you think? Everything else is just discussion. So I'm really curious to know, what do you think? What would you do? Comments, thoughts? Turn to the person next to you, have a brief chat maybe.
I'll start us off.
You're going to start us off.
Oh, since I am next to you, so it's having a quick chat.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where were there any... Did you feel like is your group still going, the group that's working across Deakin?
No, we wound up because we finished our work and we passed it. We passed it on and we established, at the end of our tenure, we established another group to take it on to, but it was less, it was more decision making while we were working, if that makes sense. We wrote policy, we did all that kind of gear. Yep.
Do you feel like you got across everything? I mean, surely there are gaps. There could be people faking CVs to get a job. There could be people using AI for inappropriate
There are always
purposes.
people faking CVs to get a job, irrespective of AI or not. What do I... Well, the purpose of the group isn't to solve anything. It's to set up structures that would enable the future management. So one of the sorts of things we did was we in collaboration with the policy folk, wrote a draft policy for responsible use across the university that would cover across people who were there. Now that set out in principle what those things were. We set out an approach to a toolbox so that when policymakers came to revise their policies in time, they would consider what AI actions they needed to take. And we had some wonderful policy folk on our working group who were incredibly helpful. The wonderful Matt Brett and Glenn Nichols were amazing. Glenn.
How many people were on the group? Because I think this is, in terms of sharing a model,
I would say 7 or 8.
Model, and sourced from each from a different group or department?
So we had myself, and then we had a representative from the education portfolio, a representative from research and research training portfolio. We had a representative from the professional services sort of group. We had an IT specialist. We had a policy specialist. We had the secretary to council.
Great. Awesome. Stephen, I think you had a question?
Stephen Matchett. I am a great admirer of CRADLE. I think it does extraordinary work. And I remember one particular paper, I think lead author was Thomas Corbin, and it was designed for academics struggling with governance, but also integrity in teaching. And the takeout, I think it was about this time last year, the takeout from memory was that the enemy good is not the perfect is the enemy of the good. Work it through, work it out as best you can, realise you will make mistakes, adapt, change, don't panic. And it seems to me that underwrites what you've been talking about. Is that we are rather like Japan in 1870 with Western technology pouring in. We have not got a clue where we're going to end up. What we've got to, as it were, suck it and see.
I think you might be referring to the Wicked Problems paper. So we had a paper that looked at, led by Thomas Corbin, that looked at how we went and spoke to a bunch of academics about designing assessment. And they were, to be honest, many of them were in despair. I can't even use any other word. They were really stressed and worried, and they just felt they couldn't solve the problem. And we were looking at it, and Thomas said, does this remind anyone else of a wicked problem? And we went and analysed their responses against a wicked problem. A wicked problem is a problem that has no single solution. And things are not correct or incorrect. They're just better or worse. There's no particular stopping point. And for example, a wicked problem is one that, depending on the angle from which you grab it, it will look differently. So for those academics who saw it as a student engagement problem, they said, oh my goodness, my students are not engaged. Some people saw it as a cheating problem. The solutions varied. And the outcome of that was that, in fact, of course, wicked problems just need to be grappled with, and we need to have permission to fail, permission to iterate, and permission to compromise. And I think that that's what you're referring to, and I think they're very powerful messages. I think we have a little less permission to fail in some of the governance issues because they're so important, and that's why I think the risk needs to be taken quite seriously. There might be some things that are very high risk, and we might need to be a little bit more cautious with those just because of the weight that's behind them.
We've got another question up the back.
Yeah, hi. My name's Andrea Davies. I work at RMIT. I'm actually in the communications department here, but I support people and culture. So I've found the conference really fascinating. I've heard a few times about some of the universities, we've got Copilot, and so I know there's lots of products at RMIT. We've got Copilot, but it's essentially the free version that's available to us. And we've been having some training by an external consultant or trainer. There goes my laptop. And he was saying that potentially all organisations really need to look at purchasing AI products, almost like how they pay for the internet. And for Wi-Fi and things like that. It's going to become an investment that all universities or organisations need to do in the future. What's your view on that and all these different products that are available?
Okay, this is just a view. I don't sit in procurement, and I'm not an expert. I think that we are, when technology comes along in waves, and I think we're still in the stabilisation phase of what's going on. I imagine that we will that AI will be integrated. Gemini, for example, comes up on every Google search that you have at the moment. But there are some issues with the technology in terms of who's paying for what. And if anyone remembers in the early days of the internet, there was a question on return on investment. That's what we're facing at the moment. I think it's difficult to predict how that will come out, except I think it's interesting that Anthropic is specialising in code and code production where it's seeing the real gains. So I suspect that where we see really strong return on investment, that's where we'll put our dollars. But it's a bit early to say where that's going to be yet, in my view.
Great.
Thanks very much for that, the thoughts and reflections, particularly the 7 challenges. Martin Sainsbury from University of Newcastle, so more from a HR background, but prior to joining the sector was in healthcare for a few years. So where I was going here, diagnostic uses and the AI analogies. So governance, responsibility and risk and the relationship between those. So certainly the examples in diagnostic healthcare where it might be it's a false positive or false negative of 1 in 100, but if you're that one, how comfortable are you? So the moral and ethical considerations there and can be very easily quantified then in that context. Bringing it into the higher education context, I think arguably never more important to deal with some of those ethical and moral issues in the context of AI use for social license, but how do we start to apply some of the learnings from some of those other sectors into how we start to use and adopt better, perhaps?
I'll have a quick go at this. I'm mindful you would have some thoughts as well, Tim, so I'll check in with you in a second. But my first response to that is healthcare is really interesting because the diagnostic, if you work in healthcare, you might hear all these, AI. Like the FDA, the Federal Drug Agency in the US, certifies very few AI uses. It's very, very heavily regulated. What isn't regulated, though, is the professional services side of healthcare. So you get a lot of, your patient information flows, you'll get you might be in your GP, they'll be using AI to do the transcription. They're not regulated. And so you end up with this sort of 2-tier system. And I suspect that's something, that sort of very highly regulated single stream and less regulated other stream is probably a lesson that we're going to have to learn. Which are the things that need to be protected because the consequences are so significant, and where do false positives, for that matter, just simply matter less?
I've got a couple of thoughts. I've worked in projects across 35 different organisations in the sector. There's a huge amount of time that has been used in the past on producing content which people may or may not read, but there's certainly at least one staff member full-time equivalent for producing a specific set of brochures in most organisations. It would be really easy to move that staff member aside and say let's do it with AI. The problem being when you actually look at the effectiveness of those brochures in the first place, they're terrible. So all the AI content is producing from a really bad bank of data. So what are we actually doing here anyway? So there's a lot of grey and a lot of, from what I can see from my contact with people in the sector, is that it's a very unregulated zone, what's going on in the professional staff environment. And we really need a lot more sort of guidance and thought about how resources are deployed in that way, because we don't have a single framework for how it should be used, and we don't really have any tabs on how much it is being used. So I think there's a lot of work to be done in that space.
Let's go 1, 2, 3 maybe. How does that sound? Thanks.
Hi there, Katrina Colt from RMIT University. Mashing up 2 of the concepts you've introduced us to, the notion of iterating, failing and learning with the notion of governance, can you see that approach being useful in terms of drafting governance, especially in a world that's transforming so rapidly?
Yeah. Yes, I really can, and I think that I just think that we may also need to have some red lines that we don't cross as well as that. So there are a couple of things that we just have to go. And I think, I mean, the most obvious example for me is stuff around deep fakes. I think we can just say, you know, no, we don't need to iterate around that. We just need to be very clear. So yes, but with some caveats.
I did want to bring us back to AI in recruitment, tie the last two sessions together. So I think explainability is going to be a non-negotiable for us if we start using AI to screen CVs, and the providers that we talk to reassure us that their tools are fully explainable and there is no black box problem. Now, in my ignorance, my understanding of CV screening tools is that they go from one end tools that can use machine learning and automation and can be entirely kind of identity blind and just look at the characteristics of the role and the characteristics of the person's CV and rate CVs off the back of that, and you have full control over that, to ones that are more predictive and generative AI style ones. I'm not sure that the universities necessarily have the capability, if the providers themselves don't have the capability to explain potential black box behavior from generative AI. And that's the thing that probably gives me the most caution around introducing those tools, as much as they would really help us in the recruitment space. How real is the explainability issue in AI?
Okay, so again, pressing the boundaries of my expertise, but I'll give it a go. Two sorts of AI, really, generative and discriminative. Discriminative is what you would use, you know, with a bone match, or, you know, the FDA, that's what they're certifying. This pattern recognition is that. I don't think that's what they're talking about with your CV issues. I've surveyed a few legal professionals around the use of their textual matchings, and they're a little bit unhappy with them. The whole point about generative AI is it is a black box. That's what it's supposed to do. It gives that unpredictability to it that makes it feel human. That's why it feels interactive. So I think you'd need to look at the specifics of the product and how that they were working, and I think that explainability won't be a quality that is stamped on the label of a particular product, but that the due diligence will have to be taken by the person using it to make sure how well it fits those categories. How much is it interpreting, and how much is it purely saying this matches that, more discriminative, and so on. So that's not sort of like, I don't know without knowing the products, but I do know that as soon as you introduce anything generative, there's always going to be a little bit of black box involved. It's how the technology works. Best thing to do is have the link back to the CV so you can double check it, but then people spend all their times checking it. That's right.
Hi, Coral War from La Trobe. I just wanted to ask about your last challenge there about who owns the decisions, and if maybe you could give an example or two of where you think that's not clear in our current governance. And for context, so I developed our responsible AI use in research guidelines for the university, and I think as part of that we felt that the decision-making pathway was pretty much covered under our current policies, procedures for research misconduct, data management, etc. So maybe just an example of where you think we currently don't have the governance structures set up.
Okay, so let me give you an example. At the moment, that's mostly covering off on usually that will be held, that's a very singular sort of process. And I actually have to say, I'm going to go out there on a limb. I think research governance is super tricky at the best of times. So you've already got a lot of stickiness in there anyways, because it's really diffuse. You've got a head of school supervising. We know that academic integrity is almost no checks on it, really, truly. In the same way student cheating does. It relies a lot on personal use. So putting that to one side, I'm getting a face from you, and you would know a lot more about this than I do. I'm talking from a AI integrity perspective here, not from a general governance perspective. So if what I've seen as messiness would be that, say, a professional staff member introduces irresponsible use into the system that could make its way into research stream or research and not be picked up via that. It's just because we're using the same systems across things to make decisions. So while research is being governed and education is being governed, you have these policies that cut across them in slightly different ways. Is that making sense as to how that can bring up a challenge?
Yeah, I think it's around thinking about the fact that we have codes of conduct, we have all of these things sitting there. Do we need to specifically call out AI use within those? We sort of felt it didn't make sense, and so that's where
Could I?
Well, sorry, I'll let you go, Tim, then we had a long debate about this, so I don't know if there's a single way. Yep.
Oh, that's a good answer. I've got two things to say. One is, as universities, one of the big failures often is that we design systems based on our requirements rather than user requirements. So when you look at your recruitment system at the moment where you have AI filtering CVs, we've got to also think, well, AI is producing these CVs and the letters, so you've got AI talking to AI. One of the challenges with that is I have a ice cream shop in Shepparton, and because my son Joshua left me without any eligible workforce, I have to hire people. Now, Shepparton is a very low socioeconomic area. I've got, each time I hire, I get 140, 150 applicants. This will be the same for when you're hiring people for manual jobs and so on. I see really clearly there that lower socioeconomic groups, particularly Indigenous groups, because we have a high representation in Shepparton, are not using AI. They're not. The digital divide is getting worse because they don't know that they haven't got access to it. They might use it at school, they might use it in some other way. So the types of candidates that I'm seeing coming through who are doing the minimum and writing the cover letter are the people who with slightly more cash, basically. So the discrimination is deeper than just some simple policy level that we can solve internally with an internal governance situation.
So I think bringing both those things together, and this is why we went back and forth so much, that's describing a situation that cuts across the whole of the university. And so that's where on the plus side, if you have a whole of university approach, you can talk about situations of discrimination, bias, and responsible use that cuts all the way across. On the other hand, you will have, there is an argument to be made that we don't need to specifically reference AI in that discussion, that we can do it without that. We ended up referencing it specifically, not to that particular conundrum, but to a similar, because that does cut across everything. Equity, access, stuff that I would say almost all our universities sign up to doing better. And I mean, people say we're carbon copies of each other, but I say go us. It's a good thing to be a carbon copy of. That AI, thinking about access, that to me is a nice thing to cut across all the different modes of that we have and offer. I feel like I've lost my articulation now, but
You're doing very well. Did we have one last question? I think we've got one more.
I'm on the challenge 7.
Yeah.
Who owns the decision? That's the big question here. Because
Not IT is what I'm told.
Because we were asked to create job-ready graduate. Now we're going to be asked to create AI-ready graduate. Whenever I speak to the employer, especially in construction industry and engineering, that's what I come from. I'm from Western Sydney University. So a lot of employers spoke to me and said, what are you doing on AI? We want the graduate to be ready to things on AI because they do a lot of procurement, big projects, and data is not that accurate. Even Google CEO acknowledged that 80% accuracy of AI. And imagine you bidding for a project of $500 million. Who owns the decision? A boss has no idea about AI. He's relying on my graduate, and he could be sacked next day because of his mistake. It's a big drama for us, and we are not teaching AI. We are discouraging not to use AI because we haven't got a policy that you cannot use AI to write your assignment.
Okay, so this is what I would suggest. It's not a policy. This is the educator hat on, which is, that's where my expertise is. That's where I default to in the end. Is I would make an argument that what we need to be doing is teaching standards of practice, because AI can't make a decision about what the quality standard is. We can, we're human, we make the call. And whether we get to learning what those standards are using with AI, without AI, it doesn't matter. We need to know, because the one thing that AI can't do is it can't actually set the standard. It's only predicting it based on patterns that it's had in the past. We choose and actively choose what quality looks like. And that's what I think we should be teaching our graduates. And if they know that, then they know where the holes are. They know that there's a problem, and then they know that they have to report that because they know what the standard ought to be. That's my very glib response. Easy to say, difficult to actually do.
Thank you, Margaret. It's been a great session. Please join me in thanking Margaret.